The Inherited Voice: Why Your Inner Critic Was Never Really You. Written by Ronnie Rowland. Published by Growth Literacy Lounge. Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that half the thoughts running through your mind were never truly yours. The voice that criticizes, doubts, and whispers that you're not enough, what if that wasn't you at all? We grow up believing that our inner critic is an inseparable part of who we are. Yet, much of it is inherited, shaped by parents, teachers, society, and the unspoken rules we absorbed without question. Over time, this borrowed voice becomes so familiar we mistake it for truth. But here's the reality: you are not the voice in your head. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's the heartbeat of this book. Your inner critic isn't an unchangeable truth, it's a pattern you can understand, reshape, and quiet. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore why that voice exists, where it comes from, and most importantly, how to reclaim the narrative. You'll learn practical techniques to separate your authentic self from the inherited noise, so you can respond to life with clarity rather than reacting from fear or doubt. This isn't about silencing your mind. It's about meeting yourself, the real you, beneath the echoes of expectation. Welcome to the Inherited Voice. Together, we'll uncover who you were before the world told you who to be. Would you like me to also draft a chapter-by-chapter outline next so the whole book flows as seamlessly as your competitors? It'll make the later scripts much more consistent. Chapter 1: Meeting the Voice You Didn't Choose. Think about the last time you felt unworthy. Maybe it was during a presentation at work, when a friend didn't return your call, or when you caught your reflection in the mirror and instantly judged yourself. That quiet, persistent voice inside your head, the one that tells you you're falling short, probably spoke up without hesitation. But here's the question few people ever stop to ask: where did that voice come from? Most of us assume our inner critic is something we're born with, a built-in compass of judgment meant to keep us in line. But the truth is more complicated. That voice isn't entirely yours. It's inherited, stitched together from the fragments of other people's expectations, disappointments, and fears. Long before you could form opinions about yourself, you absorbed theirs. A careless remark from a parent, a teacher's disapproving glance, the unspoken rules of a family trying to fit into society, all of it planted seeds. Over time, they grew into the ongoing commentary you now mistake for your own thoughts. This isn't about blaming anyone. It's about awareness. When you realize the critic inside your head was programmed rather than chosen, everything changes. You start to see that much of your self-talk is actually an echo, a repeated pattern of voices layered across generations. Someone once told you who you had to be, and your mind complied. But compliance is not identity. You've likely noticed how automatic these thoughts feel. One small mistake, and your inner critic is already shouting louder than reality itself. It's quick, relentless, and often cruel. It thrives in moments of vulnerability, and yet, it's rarely questioned. We become so accustomed to its presence that we confuse its authority with truth. But truth and habit are not the same thing. Here's what most people never realize: you can change the relationship you have with that voice. You can create distance between your awareness and the inherited judgments. By doing so, you gain the freedom to respond rather than react. Imagine pausing for a moment when the voice tells you you're failing, and calmly asking yourself, whose voice is this, really? That single question begins to unravel a lifetime of conditioning. It's uncomfortable at first because identity feels personal. We want to believe we know ourselves. But much of what we call self is borrowed, beliefs passed down like family heirlooms, carried without inspection. You may find, as we go deeper, that many of your fears aren't even your own. Here's the liberating truth: you are not broken. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. The critic exists because it once served a purpose. It tried to keep you safe, acceptable, loved. But what kept you safe as a child may be limiting you as an adult. Recognizing that shift is the first step toward reclaiming your authentic voice. This book will not ask you to silence your critic completely. That isn't the goal, and it isn't realistic. Instead, you'll learn to hear it differently, as background noise, not a command. You'll uncover its origins, question its authority, and gradually rewrite the story it's been telling you. This is where change begins, not by forcing yourself to be confident, but by understanding why you ever believed you weren't enough in the first place. Awareness creates choice, and choice creates freedom. You didn't choose the voice you carry. But starting now, you can choose how much power it has over you. Chapter 2: Tracing the Origins of Your Inner Critic. Close your eyes for a moment and think back to when you were a child. Before you learned how to measure yourself against others, before grades and expectations and quiet comparisons, there was a version of you that simply existed. That child wasn't burdened by a constant stream of judgment. But slowly, almost without noticing, the voice began to take shape. It wasn't yours at first, it was borrowed. And yet over time, it became so familiar you stopped questioning its origin. Every inner critic has a story, and it almost always begins outside of us. Maybe it was a parent whose approval felt just out of reach. Maybe it was a teacher who insisted on perfection, or a peer who made you feel small. Sometimes the source isn't even one person but a collection of moments, subtle corrections, disapproving looks, whispered reminders to behave, to be good, to fit in. Over years, these moments layer together until you carry them as if they were your own beliefs. This process is quiet and often invisible. No one sits you down and says, "Here is the voice you will live with for the rest of your life." Instead, it builds slowly, like water wearing down stone. Eventually, you accept it as part of you, unaware that its foundation was laid long ago by someone else's fears, rules, and limitations. What's important to understand is that this isn't your fault. You didn't choose these thoughts. You inherited them, from parents, from culture, from systems designed to shape you before you were old enough to resist. But inherited does not mean permanent. Once you recognize that the critic within you has roots elsewhere, you can start to loosen its hold. Listen closely the next time you hear that familiar judgment rise in your mind. Whose words are they? Do they sound like your own voice? Or do they echo someone else's? Often, if you pay attention, you'll notice traces of another person's tone, the sharpness of a parent's disappointment, the weight of a teacher's criticism, even the silent expectations of society. Realizing this distinction can be life-changing. When you see that these judgments were learned, you also see they can be unlearned. Of course, the voice can feel protective. For many of us, it started as a form of safety. If we could anticipate criticism, maybe we could avoid it. If we could stay small and quiet, maybe we wouldn't risk rejection. In its own way, the critic was trying to shield us from pain. But what protected us as children often limits us as adults. That same voice now keeps us from taking risks, speaking up, or believing in our worth. Here's the turning point. You are not required to keep carrying what was handed to you. You can learn to separate your true voice from the inherited noise. That begins with awareness, pausing to notice the judgments as they appear, tracing them back to their origins, and asking whether they reflect who you are now or who someone else once needed you to be. This isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming the present. The goal is not to fight the critic, but to understand it so deeply that it no longer defines you. You'll begin to see that beneath the layers of conditioning, there is a voice that has always been yours, steady, grounded, and far quieter than you think. You were born whole. The critic was learned. And anything learned can be unlearned. Chapter 3: Recognizing when the voice speaks. Have you ever caught yourself spiraling after a single mistake, replaying the moment over and over in your head as though the world had suddenly narrowed to just that flaw? It happens so quickly that you barely notice it until you're already drowning in self-criticism. That is the power of the inner critic. It doesn't wait for permission. It speaks instantly, sharply, and often louder than anything else around you. But learning to recognize its presence is the first step toward loosening its grip. The challenge is that the critic sounds like you. It uses your voice, your vocabulary, and your memories to build its arguments. That's what makes it so convincing. You might not even realize that you're repeating ideas someone else planted years ago. I should have known better. I always mess things up. I'll never be enough. These aren't harmless passing thoughts. Over time, they carve deep grooves into your mind, shaping the way you see yourself and your place in the world. The key is awareness. You cannot change a voice you don't notice. Start by paying attention to the moments when your emotions spike. Anger, shame, anxiety, these feelings often arrive as the critic begins speaking. The more intense the feeling, the louder the voice has become. Pause for just a second and listen closely. Is what you're hearing fact, or is it interpretation? Is it based on what's actually happening, or is it the echo of an old fear? Recognizing the critic isn't about silencing it instantly. That kind of control doesn't happen overnight, and that's okay. The goal is to build space, a small pause between what the voice says and how you respond. That pause is where your freedom begins. When you notice the thought, "I'm failing," you can choose to investigate it instead of automatically believing it. Does the evidence match the judgment? Does the tone reflect compassion, or does it sound like something someone once said to you? This process takes patience. At first, you might only catch the critic after the fact, when the moment has passed and you've already reacted. That's still progress because you're becoming aware of a pattern that used to run unchecked. Over time, you'll start catching the voice earlier, mid-thought, mid-reaction, even mid-breath. Each moment of awareness is a win, a sign that you're no longer blindly obeying an inherited script. It can feel strange at first, almost like watching your own mind from the outside. But that perspective is powerful. When you observe the critic instead of identifying with it, you create separation. You are not the thought. You are the one noticing the thought. And that shift, subtle as it seems, changes everything. The voice may never disappear entirely. That isn't the goal. Its presence doesn't make you weak or broken, it makes you human. But the less you confuse it with truth, the less control it has over your choices, your confidence, and your peace of mind. Every time you recognize the critic in real time, you reclaim a piece of yourself. You stop letting an unconscious pattern dictate your response and begin living from a place of clarity rather than conditioning. That awareness is the doorway to change, and walking through it begins now. The voice speaks. But it doesn't define you. Chapter 4. Separating your voice from the inherited one. There's a quiet moment that arrives when you finally pause and ask yourself, whose voice is this? It happens the first time you catch the critic mid-sentence, and realize that the words flooding your mind don't actually sound like you. Maybe the tone is too sharp, too unforgiving. Maybe the expectations feel impossibly high. That realization can be unsettling at first, but it's also a turning point. It's the moment you begin separating who you are from what you were taught to believe about yourself. Your true voice is different from the inherited one. It's steady, measured, and compassionate. It speaks in curiosity rather than condemnation. But when you've spent years listening to the critic on repeat, your authentic voice gets buried beneath the noise. The judgments become so automatic that you assume they reflect reality. I should be better. I should be further along. I should already know this. If you pay attention, you'll notice that most of these shoulds come from someone else's script, not your own. Start by observing without judgment. The next time the critic speaks, take a breath and simply notice it. Don't argue. Don't try to silence it. Just listen. Does the tone feel supportive or shaming? Does it offer solutions or only accusations? That simple awareness begins to create distance. You stop merging with the voice and start seeing it for what it is, a pattern, not a truth. This distance is powerful. It gives you the space to respond differently. Instead of automatically believing the critic, you can question it. Where did this thought come from? Whose approval am I seeking? Whose disappointment am I trying to avoid? Often, the answers lead you back to moments long past, a parent's offhand remark, a teacher's demand for perfection, a cultural standard you never agreed to but absorbed anyway. The critic echoes those voices, but it is not you. Imagine carrying a backpack someone handed you years ago. You've been walking with it so long you forgot to ask what's inside. When you finally open it, you realize it's full of other people's fears, expectations, and unresolved pain. You've been carrying their weight, mistaking it for your own. Separating your voice from the inherited one is like finally setting that backpack down. It doesn't happen overnight. At first, the critic will still sound convincing because it's familiar. But each time you pause, notice, and choose not to react from that place, you strengthen your connection to your authentic self. Over time, your own voice grows clearer. It speaks with patience instead of pressure, compassion instead of criticism. It doesn't demand perfection. It encourages progress. This process isn't about erasing the critic entirely. That's not realistic, and it's not necessary. The goal is to shift the balance, to stop letting the inherited voice dominate every decision, every reaction, every quiet moment of reflection. When your own voice becomes louder than the critic, you begin to live differently. Choices feel lighter. Risks feel possible. Even failure doesn't carry the same weight because it no longer threatens your sense of worth. You were not born with this critic. It was learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. Beneath the noise, there has always been a part of you untouched by judgment. That's the voice we are working to uncover, the one that belongs fully to you. The critic may speak, but it doesn't get the final word. Chapter 5. Understanding the triggers behind the voice. The inner critic rarely appears without reason. It's triggered, summoned by situations, people, and memories that awaken old patterns you might not even realize are still alive. You may think the voice shows up randomly, but it almost always follows a script that's been written for years. The key to loosening its grip lies in understanding what pulls it to the surface. Think about the last time you felt an overwhelming wave of self-judgment. Maybe you were overlooked for a promotion. Maybe a friend didn't respond the way you expected. Maybe a single offhand comment pierced deeper than it should have. That sting you felt wasn't just about the present moment, it tapped into something older, something familiar. The critic thrives on these connections between past and present, feeding on echoes of unresolved emotions. These triggers are personal and deeply rooted. For one person, it's a raised eyebrow from a manager that recalls a parent's disapproval. For another, it's being excluded from plans, reigniting the loneliness of childhood. None of this happens consciously. The body remembers before the mind does, and the critic responds automatically, as though you're reliving an earlier wound. Recognizing this link is essential because it allows you to step out of old narratives and see the present for what it really is. Start by paying attention to patterns. Notice when the voice is loudest. Is it during moments of failure, rejection, or uncertainty? Does it appear when you're being compared to others, even if only in your own head? These moments are invitations to look beneath the surface. The critic's reaction may be automatic, but you can learn to pause and ask yourself, what's this really about? Often, the answer has less to do with today and more to do with yesterday. Awareness is the first step, but compassion is what makes awareness transformative. It's easy to get frustrated with yourself for reacting strongly or feeling sensitive, but judgment only deepens the critic's hold. Instead, try meeting your triggers with curiosity. When you notice the voice rising, ask where it learned this script. Who taught it that mistakes are unacceptable? Who convinced it that belonging depends on perfection? These questions don't erase the critic, but they help soften its authority. You may also notice that certain environments intensify the voice. Workplaces driven by competition, families with rigid expectations, or social circles rooted in comparison can amplify triggers that already exist. When you're aware of these dynamics, you can make conscious choices about how to navigate them. Sometimes that means setting boundaries. Other times, it means reminding yourself that you are no longer the child who needed to earn approval just to feel safe. There's power in remembering that triggers aren't a sign of weakness. They're signals. They point to places within you that are still healing, places where your authentic voice wants to emerge. Each trigger is an opportunity to practice responding instead of reacting, to pause, breathe, and choose a different path than the one laid out by old conditioning. With time, you'll begin to notice a shift. The same comment that once sent you spiraling will start to feel lighter. Situations that once paralyzed you with doubt will lose their intensity. That's not because the triggers disappear but because you've learned to meet them differently. The critic feeds on unconsciousness. The moment you see the pattern, you take back your power. You're no longer trapped in the reflex of inherited judgment. You begin to step into the present, grounded, aware, and free to choose a response that reflects who you are now, not who you once had to be. Chapter 6: Creating Space Between You and the Voice. There's a subtle but powerful shift that happens when you realize you are not the voice in your head. Up until that moment, the critic feels fused with who you are. Its judgments sound like facts. Its tone feels personal. But the moment you begin to observe it instead of obeying it, everything changes. You create space, and in that space, freedom begins. This separation doesn't happen by force. You don't need to fight the critic or push it away. That only feeds its energy. Instead, you practice noticing it as if you were watching clouds drift across the sky. When a critical thought arises, "I'm not good enough, I'll never get this right," pause for a breath. Observe it without responding. In doing so, you remind yourself, this is a thought, not a truth. That small reminder loosens the grip the critic holds. At first, it will feel unnatural. You've spent years identifying with the voice, accepting its commentary as reality. But over time, this quiet noticing becomes a practice. You catch the thought before it spirals. You question its authority before it settles in. That single pause creates a buffer between stimulus and response, a choice where there used to be only reaction. Imagine standing on a busy street, watching cars speed past. Each car is a thought, racing through your mind. The critic drives the loudest ones, honking and demanding your attention. But you're not in the car. You're standing on the sidewalk, observing traffic go by. You don't have to climb in. You can simply watch. This is what creating space feels like, no longer tangled inside the critic's narrative, but grounded in your awareness of it. Breath can be an anchor here. When the critic surges, return to the rhythm of your breathing. Inhale slowly. Exhale fully. This isn't about escaping the thought, it's about steadying yourself so you can meet it differently. A calm body makes room for a calm mind. The more you practice, the more instinctive it becomes. Over time, the critic loses the urgency it once carried. This practice isn't about silencing the voice entirely. That expectation leads to frustration because the critic, in some form, will always exist. Instead, the goal is to stop letting it control you. You learn to notice without reacting, to listen without believing, to observe without absorbing. The voice might still speak, but its power over your choices begins to fade. As you create this space, something else begins to emerge, your authentic voice. It's quieter, often overlooked because the critic is so loud, but it's there. It offers curiosity instead of condemnation, encouragement instead of shame. You may hear it when you pause long enough to let the noise settle. At first, it might sound faint, like a whisper beneath the surface. But the more you listen for it, the clearer it becomes. The process takes time, and that's okay. Some days the critic will feel louder than ever, and you'll slip back into old reactions. That isn't failure. It's practice. Every time you notice, pause, and create distance, even for a single breath, you strengthen a new habit. You remind yourself that you are more than the sum of your inherited voices. Freedom doesn't come from erasing the critic. It comes from seeing it clearly and choosing not to live by its rules. In the space you create, your own voice begins to guide you forward. Chapter 7: Rewriting the Script. Once you begin to separate yourself from the inherited voice, the next step becomes clear. You rewrite the script. The thoughts that have run on autopilot for years don't disappear on their own, they must be gently replaced. But you don't do this by force. You do it through repetition, awareness, and choice. The same way the critic's voice was built, slowly, over time, your new inner narrative is built the same way, one thought at a time. You may not have chosen the original script. You didn't decide to believe you weren't enough, or that your worth depended on performance, or that making a mistake meant you'd be rejected. Those lines were handed to you, subtly or directly, until they became familiar. But familiarity isn't truth. It's just practice. And what has been practiced can be unlearned and rewritten. Start by noticing the most common phrases your critic uses. I should have done better. Why do I always mess this up? They're probably disappointed in me. These lines feel automatic, but they're not inevitable. Each one is a cue, a place where a new sentence can begin. The goal isn't to drown out the old voice with fake positivity. You're not replacing harshness with blind optimism. You're replacing distortion with accuracy. Instead of "I always get it wrong," try "I'm learning, and this is part of that process." Instead of "They must think I'm a failure," try "I don't actually know what they're thinking, and I'm allowed to be imperfect." These aren't affirmations in the traditional sense. They're reframes, subtle shifts that tell the truth in a kinder tone. At first, the new voice will feel unnatural. That's expected. You're speaking a language you haven't been taught. The critic's script has been rehearsed for years. Of course, it feels more convincing. But the discomfort of change doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, it means you're doing something new. That awkwardness is growth in motion. Rewriting the script also means listening for tone. The critic doesn't always attack with words, sometimes it's the sarcasm, the shame, the weight behind a sentence. A phrase like, "Well, that was smart" isn't about content, it's about energy. Pay attention to that energy. The way the thought feels is as important as what it says. When you practice a new script, don't expect immediate silence from the old one. The critic will likely push back. It may tell you the new thoughts are naive or fake. That's normal. It's trying to keep you in the familiar. But every time you choose the new line anyway, you chip away at the old structure. Over time, the foundation weakens. The voice softens. Your truth gets louder. This isn't about perfection. There will be days when the old script takes over. That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're still learning. The goal is progress, not silence. You're not erasing every critical thought. You're just refusing to let it be the only one in the room. Eventually, the new voice becomes more than a response. It becomes a habit. It shows up on its own. It interrupts the critic before you even notice. And when that happens, when your own voice starts to lead the conversation, you'll realize just how much power you've reclaimed. You didn't write the original script, but you're the one holding the pen now. Chapter 8: Taking Back Your Power. The inner critic thrives when you believe it's in control. For years, you've listened to its judgments as if they were commands, shaping your choices to avoid failure, rejection, or disapproval. But here's the truth: the critic has no real authority. Its power exists only in the belief you give it. When you begin to see that distinction, you reclaim a sense of control you may have forgotten was even possible. Taking back your power starts with choice, the choice to stop reacting automatically to every critical thought. The voice will speak, as it always has, but you don't have to obey. You can pause, breathe, and decide whether the thought deserves your attention. That moment of choice, however small, is where control begins. This isn't about resisting the voice or trying to force it silent. Fighting the critic often strengthens it because conflict keeps you focused on it. Instead, it's about shifting your perspective. Rather than asking, "How do I get rid of this voice?" try asking, "How do I want to respond when it speaks?" That single change reframes the relationship. You stop being at the mercy of inherited judgments and start acting from a place of awareness. Sometimes taking back your power means challenging long-held assumptions. Perhaps you've believed for years that your worth depends on achievement, or that love is earned only by being perfect. These beliefs weren't born with you, they were handed down, often unconsciously. Questioning them can feel uncomfortable at first because identity is tied to what we've been taught. But discomfort isn't danger, it's growth in motion. One of the most effective ways to reclaim your power is to reconnect with what's true right now. The critic often speaks in absolutes: "You always fail," "You'll never succeed." These statements thrive on exaggeration, but when you bring yourself into the present, they begin to unravel. Ask yourself, what's actually happening in this moment? Focus on what's real, not on what the voice predicts. Truth lives in the present, and the critic loses strength when you stop feeding it imagined fears. There's also power in compassion, the kind you extend to yourself. Think of someone you love deeply. If they made a mistake, would you speak to them the way your critic speaks to you? Of course not. You'd offer understanding, perspective, and patience. You deserve that same kindness. Each time you choose compassion over condemnation, you teach your mind a new way to relate to itself. The critic may still appear, but its edges soften when met with empathy instead of resistance. Taking back your power doesn't mean the critic disappears. It means the voice stops driving your decisions. You become the one choosing how to act, how to respond, and what to believe. And over time, something profound begins to shift. Your sense of self grows stronger than the old patterns. This isn't a one-time transformation. It's a practice. Some days you'll catch the critic instantly, and other days it may take over before you realize it. That's normal. The goal isn't perfection but persistence. Every moment you choose your own voice over the inherited one is progress. Each small decision adds up, rewiring the way you move through the world. Eventually, you'll look back and notice how much lighter life feels. Not because the critic stopped talking, but because you stopped listening as if it held the truth. The authority it once carried dissolves when you realize the final word has always been yours. You are not powerless here. You never were. Chapter 9. Building Emotional Resilience. The inner critic thrives in moments of stress, disappointment, and uncertainty. When life feels unstable, the voice gets louder, feeding on doubt and amplifying fear. That's why building emotional resilience is such an important part of reclaiming your power. Resilience doesn't silence the critic entirely, but it changes how you respond when it speaks. Instead of collapsing under its weight, you learn to stay steady, grounded, and present. Resilience begins with acceptance. Life will always hold unexpected challenges, situations you can't control, outcomes you can't predict. The critic often tries to convince you that being perfect will protect you, that if you avoid mistakes and anticipate every possibility, you'll be safe from judgment and rejection. But perfection is a moving target, and chasing it only strengthens the critic's grip. True resilience comes from acknowledging that uncertainty is inevitable while trusting your ability to navigate it. This trust is built slowly through practice. Every time you face a difficulty and choose to meet it without collapsing into self-blame, you strengthen your foundation. It's not about avoiding failure or pretending things don't hurt. It's about learning to stay with yourself even when life feels uncomfortable. Over time, you begin to see that discomfort isn't a threat, it's a teacher. Resilience also grows when you create balance between your thoughts and emotions. The critic often speaks in extremes, fueling panic or shame that can cloud your perspective. But when you pause, breathe, and anchor yourself in the present, you create space to see the situation more clearly. This doesn't make hard moments easy, but it keeps you from spiraling into old patterns of inherited judgment. Self-care plays an essential role here. Your emotional resilience is tied to your physical and mental well-being, even when the connection isn't obvious. Sleep, movement, nutrition, and rest are not luxuries, they are resources. When your body is depleted, the critic's voice grows louder because your mind has less energy to meet it with perspective. Taking care of yourself is an indulgence, it's maintenance for your ability to respond thoughtfully instead of reactively. Another part of resilience is reframing how you see setbacks. The critic frames failure as proof that you're inadequate, but in reality, mistakes are inevitable. They're also invaluable. Every challenge you face, every misstep you take, carries information. Resilience comes from shifting the meaning you attach to those moments. Instead of "I failed, so I'm not enough, try this didn't work, but I can learn and adapt." The experience hasn't defined you, it has refined you. Compassion strengthens resilience as well. Meeting yourself with kindness in the middle of struggle doesn't erase pain, but it keeps the critic from turning it into shame. You can acknowledge your feelings without letting them consume you. "This is hard" can coexist with "I trust myself to handle it." That balance, validating your emotions while still choosing your response, is at the heart of emotional strength. Over time, you'll notice that the critic shows up less forcefully when challenges arise. Not because it's gone, but because you've changed your relationship to it. You've built a steadiness inside you that no inherited judgment can shake. Resilience doesn't mean never falling. It means trusting yourself to get back up every time you do. And each time you rise, you prove to yourself, and to that critical voice, that you are capable of more than it ever allowed you to believe. Chapter 10. Letting go of the need for approval. The inner critic often survives on one powerful belief: that your worth depends on what others think of you. From early childhood, you may have learned to seek approval to feel safe, accepted, or loved. When you performed well, you were praised. When you fell short, you sensed disappointment. Over time, your nervous system came to equate belonging with perfection and acceptance with meeting expectations. Without even realizing it, you began outsourcing your self-worth. This habit doesn't disappear simply because you're older. That borrowed voice still speaks whenever you fear judgment. It warns you not to take risks, not to speak up, not to stand out. It tells you, if they disapprove, you've failed. But this belief is rooted in old conditioning, not truth. The critic uses your longing for approval to maintain control. Recognizing this dynamic is the first step to reclaiming your independence. Imagine how differently you'd live if your choices weren't dictated by what others might think. How many opportunities have you avoided because the critic convinced you the risk wasn't worth the rejection? How many parts of yourself have you hidden because you feared they wouldn't be accepted? Every time you sacrifice authenticity for approval, you reinforce the critic's power and silence your own voice. Letting go of this need doesn't mean you stop caring about people or their opinions. It means you stop using them as the measure of your value. Approval can feel good, but it isn't proof of your worth. When you understand this, you free yourself from constantly trying to earn acceptance that was never conditional in the first place. This shift begins with awareness. Notice when the critic frames a decision through the lens of other people's reactions. What will they think? What if I disappoint them? What if I'm not enough? These questions are signals that your inherited voice is speaking. Pause when they arise and ask yourself, what do I want here? What matters to me? Returning to your own intentions interrupts the automatic pattern of seeking validation outside yourself. It also helps to challenge the assumptions behind the critic's fears. The truth is, people are thinking about you far less than your inner voice imagines. Most are busy managing their own insecurities and chasing their own approval. The imagined scrutiny you fear is often an illusion, a projection of old lessons from childhood when acceptance truly felt tied to survival. Today, your worth no longer depends on being perfect, pleasing, or performing. Releasing the need for approval also involves compassion for yourself. For years, seeking acceptance may have been your way of staying safe. That instinct wasn't wrong, it protected you once. But what kept you safe then may be limiting you now. Acknowledge that you learned this strategy for a reason, and thank yourself for surviving it. Then remind yourself you're free to choose a new way forward. When you begin making decisions based on your values rather than others' expectations, something profound happens. The critic starts losing ground. Its warnings sound weaker because they no longer align with how you define success or belonging. You begin living from your own center, guided by an internal compass rather than external approval. There will be moments when the critic resurfaces, insisting you need validation to feel secure. That's okay. You don't have to silence it. You only need to remember that its story isn't the whole truth. Over time, you'll discover a deeper sense of worth, one that doesn't rise and fall with anyone else's opinion. Approval may come, and approval may go. But your value stays constant. Always. Chapter 11. Becoming the author of your own voice. There comes a moment when you realize that the voice you've been listening to for so long is not the authority you thought it was. You notice its patterns. You hear the familiar criticisms before they land. And slowly, something shifts. You stop reacting on command and start questioning whether those inherited rules still serve you. That is the beginning of freedom, the quiet point where you reclaim authorship of your own voice. For most of your life, the critic has shaped your choices without your awareness. It convinced you to play small to avoid disapproval. It warned you not to risk failure or embarrassment. It told you stories about who you are and what's possible, and you accepted them as fact. But as you've begun to notice, those stories were never entirely yours. They were passed down through words, gestures, and expectations until they became your default script. Now, for the first time, you can decide which parts to keep and which to let go. Becoming the author of your own voice doesn't mean silencing the critic forever. The goal isn't elimination, it's integration. The voice may always whisper, But you no longer confuse it with truth. You recognize it for what it is, a remnant of lessons learned long ago. You can thank it for its attempts to keep you safe while choosing a different response that reflects who you are now, not who you were told to be. This is where choice meets responsibility. Writing your own voice means defining your values instead of living by inherited ones. It means pausing long enough to ask yourself what matters most to you, not just what will earn approval or avoid rejection. With each conscious decision, you strengthen your connection to the part of you untouched by conditioning, the steady, grounded voice that's been waiting beneath the noise. You may notice, too, that as your authentic voice grows stronger, your relationship with others begins to change. When you no longer rely on external validation to feel worthy, you become freer in your interactions. You can listen without defensiveness, speak without rehearsing, and connect without fear of judgment. Paradoxically, letting go of the need for approval often deepens your capacity for genuine connection, because you're no longer performing for acceptance. This doesn't mean the path ahead will always feel easy. There will still be days when the critic speaks loudly, moments when old triggers return, and times when fear tempts you back into familiar patterns. That's part of being human. The difference is that now you're aware. And awareness changes everything. Each time you catch the voice and choose differently, you reinforce your freedom. Each moment becomes an opportunity to write another sentence, another chapter, in the story you're authoring for yourself. Over time, the volume of the critic fades into the background. It may still speak, but it no longer defines you. You begin to live from a place of presence rather than reaction, guided by values you've chosen and a voice you trust. That is the true power you've been building, not the absence of fear or judgment, but the ability to move forward anyway, aligned with who you are beneath it all. You didn't choose the voice you inherited. But today, and every day after, you choose the one you'll create. The pen is in your hand now. Take care and be well.